Well, hello, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Kathy and I are really impressed with your background and all of the initiatives that you're working on. And we thought we could open up this conversation and just invite you to introduce yourselves to our viewers.
Sure. Well, I'm Dan Lukasik. I live in Buffalo, New York. I'm going to be 64 in a couple of months. Hard to believe. I was a trial lawyer for over 32 years, representing railroad workers, steel workers, and iron workers all across the state. My first job was spent the first 10 years of my practice in New York City. And I did that for many years. And about 25 years ago, I was the managing partner at my law firm. And I was diagnosed with major depression, which was a life-changing experience. I think out of that came a lot of blessings, difficult blessings, at the time. It was an awful, awful thing to go through. But who would think, 25 years later, I'd be talking to you about advocacy and mental health and stigma. So I'm very grateful that I can.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. First of all, your professional credentials and experience are very impressive. And you mentioned something that I think is really intriguing. You talked about how your diagnosis with major depression was a very difficult time, and you also said that it was a blessing. And I'm curious if we could maybe expand on that kind of duality a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, I could put it this way, with the pain of depression, right? And it really affected me with three major symptoms for myself. I was sad all the time, but didn't show that. I think men in our culture often don't, especially lawyers often don't. I remember driving home one night. It was dark, it was snowing, and I started sobbing so I couldn't see the road, so I pulled over and just sat in an empty parking lot and cried. And then went home and my wife and my daughter, and they said, "How was my day?" And I said, "Just great." So the other thing that started happening around that time is a lot of problems with sleep. I was tired all the time. I couldn't get a night's sleep. Go to bed at 8 o'clock in the at night. I try to do everything, and I would usually wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and walk around the house, watch some shows. But then I just got tired of that, so I showered, shaved, put on my suit, and on my way to work, went to an all-night coffee shop. So I get there about 3 in the morning, and I'd read old newspapers that people had left behind, and then I kind of look out the window and wait for the sun to come up, and then I drive to my office and walk through the front door, and my receptionist would say, "How you doing, Dan?" I said, "Just great. Everything's great." Where the rubber really hit the road, though, was my concentration started to really waver. I had trouble concentrating, retaining. So something that, a written document that I might file with the court might take me a week. It now took me 3 or 4 weeks. And I was hiding, just delaying things, pushing off things, uh, uh, hoping that everybody would find out to the point where it was unmanageable and unsustainable. And that's when I got treatment with a psychologist and a psychiatrist.
Mm, wow. I really appreciate you opening up and sharing your journey and the way kind of some of those symptoms manifested for you and your experience. And one thing that you said really kind of stands out in terms of just the profound sadness and crying and the sleeplessness that you experienced, but then you're reporting to people, to your colleagues, and to your family that everything was just fine. And it reminds me of kind of that social mask that all of us wear to some degree or other, and that pressure to be fine. And you mentioned also, you kind of connected that to the male experience and of not showing expression. And you also mentioned the lawyer experience of maybe not showing expression. And I wonder if we could maybe talk a little bit about that. I concur 100% about the gender implications of showing expression and the shoulds and should nots. But can you tell us a little bit, kind of professionally, of what some of those expectations are for lawyers?
Sure. Well, some of the things that I would say about it is there's expectations from clients that you'll win, and sometimes those expectations are realistic, sometimes they're not. But you still live with those expectations because they're paying you to win or to figure it out. Uh, Most lawyers that I know are perfectionists. They're ambitious. They want to win. Uh, Oftentimes for the best of reasons. That's why I wanted to win. I wanted to. Lot was riding on my client making this happen, uh, and it could go two ways. I think that 2017, the American Bar Association National Task Force came out, and it's important for people to know because the largest study of its kind ever done, confidential survey of 13,000 lawyers. And what they found, at least as it relates to depression specifically, is they asked them within the past year, and they gave them the DOS test and a couple other indicators of depression. How many of you had a problem with depression? And it was 28%, which is, I think, two, three, four times the general population. And then they asked them over the course of your legal career, how many have had a problem with depression? It's 43%, or one in two. Very high rates for anxiety, very high rates for problematic drinking, and tragically, high rates for suicidal ideation. There's been some recent data and studies showing lawyers, especially in high stress aspects of law, have 22 times the rate of suicide than the average population. So I think people bring into the profession certain risk factors. I certainly did with genetics and a family history of neglect and abuse. My dad was an alcoholic. But there's something unique about the legal profession and the culture of the legal profession that I think has a lot to do with these very high rates.
And I
Wow.
appreciate you sharing about your experience personally as an attorney, but I wonder if when you speak to that culture, is it a culture that supports people being open about those feelings and mental
Yeah,
health?
what I usually say is, I come at it from my benchmark is 25 years ago, right? So at that time, nobody talked about it. I didn't know anybody with depression, let alone any lawyer with depression. Now it's really changed dramatically in 25 years, where you have all kinds of initiatives, all kinds of programming. The National Task Force came out in 2017. The New York State Bar Association, which is huge. I'm on the New York State Bar Association Task Force. And you have all the states around the US with these task forces seeking to address the epidemic of mental health problems in the law. So I think the question is, are people receptive? I think it depends. I think of it as a continuum. Some are all in on this, law firms, law schools. Some are in the beginning of the process, and some don't want anything to do with it. And the some that don't want anything to do with it, some of it's because they don't know what to do about it. But sometimes especially the mid to larger firms, the economic model is based on billable hours. And, the people who manage these firms don't have much sympathy or empathy for people who have mental health struggles because they feel like, well, I did it. I worked 80 hours a week for 10 years. You can't cut it. You can't cut it. So, young people are attracted to the allure, the shiny, lures of these kinds of places, the money, the prestige. A lot of law students come out of law school with very high debt loads, so they have to work at these places. So I think there's a range of responses, but the good thing, cautious optimism, it's moving in the right direction. That's good.
Mm. Yeah, you touched on so many great points, and some that I hadn't really considered before. I mean, I think you make a great point in terms of the pressures of the job. It sounds like it's a very demanding job, and a lot of perfectionism is expected. I also appreciate you touching on some of that workplace culture and kind of the attitude of just suck it up, in so many words, that this is how it's always been, and this is what I went through, and so this is kind of the expectation. Even though it's promising, it sounds like that's changing and that's morphing into new territory. But
I think it
you said
is.
that's wonderful. I think the more initiatives and the more awareness that is spread, certainly the better. But you mentioned something else in terms of the culture, or not the culture, the expectation of winning. And I never really thought about that specifically. And it's almost like if you kind of unpack that word winning, what do we think about when we think of winning? And we might even think that it does somebody who I'm hiring to help me win a case, are we expecting that person not to be vulnerable and not to, be a fallible, real human being? And so just the implications surrounding that word are really striking to me. And I really appreciate that you point out kind of the implications of being in a profession where winning is the end goal.
Well, we're paid to solve problems. We're not supposed to have problems. And,
Yes.
there's a great article. I was in contact with him years ago, but Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, the father of the positive psychology movement, in his one book, he has a chapter, Why Are Lawyers So Unhappy? And
Mm,
he talks about winning and losing as a zero-sum game. So you're either a winner or you're a loser. And I often have thought one of the worst things you could say to a man, not all men, but a lot of men, including in today's political climate, is that you're a loser,
mm,
and nobody wants to be a loser. That's one dimension that Dr. Seligman points out in his chapter. The other one he points out, especially for younger lawyers, is low decision latitude, where they don't have many choices about what areas of the law they practice in. They're pretty much, it's a pyramid in the sense you're told what to do, you're told how long to work. Separate and apart from Seligman's thing is you have many lawyers today who know what to do, go to a therapist, medication, exercise, work-life balance, but they don't have the time. So that's one of the biggest barriers to mental health in the law is yes, there's all these great ideas, but I don't have the time. You might be a solo practitioner and don't have the time, or you might work at a law firm with 5,000 lawyers, and it comes down to that where the rubber meets the road. I don't have the time.
mm. Yeah, when I think about the legal profession, I think of people clocking in 80 hours a week. And you're right, um, self care sounds great, but we don't have 25 hours a day. We don't have
Right.
that extra. Where
Yeah.
does that extra time come from?
Well, one of the things interesting, I teach 50 law students this class, mental health and well-being in the legal profession at the University of Buffalo. And we unpack that, the time element. And I do talk about cell phone use quite a bit. And
Mm,
I said, people your age group are on their cell phones like 6 hours a day. And they've done the science on it, and they know out of those 6 hours, half of it is social media, scrolling, things like that. So I understand that you need your cell phone for work or classes, but you could say, I say, well, to tell me you have no time, it isn't true. And we don't see ourselves as having a choice about cell phone use because it's an addiction. So what I have them do at the beginning of the year is track how much time they spend on their cell phone, and then just say how much time of that time is social media and scrolling. And it predictably every 5 years, the amount of time goes over the semester down, 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 down. So it gives them a sense of agency that, okay, um, you could be stressed out about being stressed out. You could be stressed out about repeating the mantra, I'm so stressed out, I don't have any time, I don't have any time, I don't have any time. When if you take a step back, maybe not exactly true all the time.
Wow, that sounds like a really great eye-opening activity in terms of how having your students track their cell phone usage. I mean, I think we all collectively know we all spend too much time on our phones, but sometimes it's just the time slips past us and we don't really understand how many hours. When you just said 6, I did a little internal gasp. That just seems like such a waste of time.
Well, and it's challenging because and Apple and these other are all too happy that we spend that amount of time on there, and so are marketers and advertisers. But I think we're surprised, aren't we? One of the things with the obesity epidemic, I'm seeing a nutritionist now is logging your food, whatever you eat, every day. And so one of the first recommendations she had, because I love ice cream, and when I'm down and depressed, I like crave sweets. So I would eat like a pint of ice cream. And she said, Dan, how much is in that ice cream? I go, I have no idea. And it turned out to be 1,200 calories, which is about half of my daily intake. She goes, I'm not going to tell you not to eat ice cream, which I thought she was going to say. She goes, how about if you, instead of that, have a small Dairy Queen cone? Find out how much is in that. And it was 250 calories. So 1/6 of what was in the pint. So she's getting at that point about agency, isn't she? And I think that's true with their cell phones. Thinking of it, there's this addiction quality to it. We're suffering, so we're trying to turn it off. But if we can think of it as like, okay, I'm not going to not use my cell phone. So, can I decrease my use by 10%? I mean, that's an hour, I mean, so that's like one of the things I do with them.
And I love that because I think for especially legal, students or scholars, for younger people, that introduces them to self-care early on before they get
Yes.
out there. And, I think the lawyer psyche is more pragmatic. So that would appeal to like problem solving and kind of thinking, okay, this makes sense. I could.
And they think that way. And I teach them about mindfulness. And one of the things I talk to them about is looking at the screen and how it lights up a different section of the brain, the back of the brain, which is the opposite of, your frontal center, your executive functioning. And it makes it very hard to develop deep thought, concentration. And, when we look at mindfulness, it lights up this part of the brain. It helps us with decision making, modulating our emotions, and that's where we want to be. So I'm not saying throw the cell phone in the swimming pool, but think through this a little bit. Is this how you want to be spending your time?
Well, one time Cindy and I did a workshop about this, about self-care across the professional life cycle. And that was more for helping professions like counselors, social workers, human services, but aligns with what you're talking about with attorneys, because one of the things we tell people is it doesn't get easier. When you're in school, you think, oh, well, once I get out of school, I'll have time to exercise and take care of myself. Except no, because you're a young attorney at a firm and you're busting it out 24/7. You don't have time then. And then life happens, you get the house, you get the
It's
family, you get the kids,
true.
then you don't have time. And you think, oh, okay, when I retire, I'll have time. And then you don't, it never happens if you don't make it.
Yes, yes. And some of that is value decisions, what you value, the myth of success in life. My daughter is taking the bar exam. She went to UB Law School. She happened to have her dad as a professor, which is pretty cool. But from a young age, I told her, and I tell the students, we ask the wrong question. We ask ourselves, what does it mean to be have a successful life. And I said, a better question for you to think about and reflect on, what does it mean to have a good life? And success could certainly be part of that. But depending upon your reflection about it, it takes you could take you in very different directions in life. And sometimes that's tough because at 25 we don't know. We don't know a lot about life. And then what happens as time goes by rapidly, and in the legal profession, we know there's a high incidence of malpractice lawsuits, grievances due to things like depression, drinking, so on and so forth. So lots of times it's been my people wait till the wheel falls off. And maybe that's true in your profession with non-lawyers. Uh, my wife told me she's divorcing me. She's sick of dealing with my depression or my drinking. Uh, we're alienated from our children. The wait until the pain rises to the level that they'll seek out help and counseling.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's all very thought provoking. And I want to just briefly touch on something you said that I think is really meaningful, kind of the reframe of moving from having a successful life to having a good life. When I think of the word success, I think of something that directly relates to one's profession. And as a lawyer, kind of going back to that zero sum winner or loser, I think that can get you into that loop of thinking in that way. Whereas when I think of a good life, I think of something that's more well rounded and encompasses all aspects of who we are.
I remember about 5 years ago, I mentored a young man who went to Georgetown, and then he got into law school at Case Western in Ohio. And he said, Dan, all my friends from Georgetown are going to Wall Street and these big firms. And he had bipolar disorder. So I said, I put my arm around him. I said, listen, this isn't good for you. This is not going to be a healthy, happy life that is supports your mental health and well-being. So he decided not to do that, and he moved out to Montana, and he's working for a boutique, a small law firm that he enjoys, and people are nice, and he gets to hike in the mountains and take care of his mental health. I think in our culture, especially in legal culture, you have people around you who are reinforcing those stereotypes. So, say at a big firm, well, everybody does this. Everybody cares about money and partnership and so on and so forth. You don't have somebody whispering in your ear saying, "Hey, wait a minute. Does that is this a good life for you?" Um, so, at least with the students, I wanted them to reflect on that. And maybe that's the first time they've heard that. I don't know. A lot of people, a lot of parents perhaps encourage their children to go to law school. They think it's the golden ring or ticket to, or they're proud or whatever. There was this thing in the Wall Street Journal where this woman who went to Yale Law School, clerked on the Supreme Court, was asked about this problem of why are so many lawyers unhappy. And I think it was very insightful. She said, well, maybe 50% of people who go to law school drift into the profession. They don't have any particular passion for it. They don't have any avocation for it. They might not even want to go to law school, but they don't know what else to do. And it seems to be a good idea. And they think, I'll figure it out later. I'll park my fanny in law school for 3 years. And then they get out and then they don't like it. And then now I got debt. Now, I have this degree, so I should practice. And then the cycle goes on and on and on and on. So,
That's really interesting. When I think about why somebody would be drawn to the law profession, certainly you mentioned prestige, you mentioned money, you mentioned that it seems like it would be a good thing to do. We think of those upper echelon jobs like doctor and lawyer, and so it seems like moving in that direction would behoove us to pursue something like that. Um, in your work as both a lawyer or even reflecting on yourself and as well as working with students, can you think of other qualities that might be unique to lawyers? So certainly there's certain qualities that are reinforced once you get into the field, but could you think of any qualities that maybe lawyers tend to have that encourages them
Yes.
to enter the field?
Yes. Going back, we talked about perfectionism and how many are type A personalities, but the other dimension that I talk about a lot is something that Martin Seligman talks about, which is pessimism.
Mhm.
Lawyers tend to be a grumpy bunch. They tend to look for the worst in everything, usually because it's adaptive to the profession. You're problem solving. I would walk into a courtroom to pick a jury, and I'd be scanning the courtroom looking for trouble. That might be, gee, the judge looks pissed off today, or gee, those potential jurors are looking at me a different way. You're constantly hypervigilant, and so that comes back to pessimism. And he talks about it like it's more like not just it's a global view of things. And I think lawyers can be cynical people, pessimistic people. I know I've gone into conferences with say I'm going to a conference with a judge and there's four other lawyers on the other side, and you feel like you're walking into a wake sometimes when they look miserable. Uh, but that's not to say, one of the things I say to my law students, I'm not here standing up here to say, oh, don't go into law. It's going to make you miserable. It's going to make you depressed. Some of the best times of my life have been as a lawyer, being of service to people. So that's not the point. The point is, when I talk to them, is there's some unique risk factors associated with this profession that you have to address. Because if you don't, they'll address you.
Wow, that's really interesting. Kathy, go ahead.
Something I was thinking about, which again, not related to the internal characteristics of attorneys, but as a culture, particularly in the United States, it's funny to make fun of lawyers and lawyer
Yes.
kids and to
Hmm.
disrespect lawyers almost.
Hmm.
Yes.
And so it becomes okay to sort of diss on lawyers, which is very I think that's very stressful actually, because it's
Hmm.
hard
It
work.
is.
You're highly educated, you do have these very unique characteristics, and then it's like okay to always make lawyer jokes, which isn't right either.
It isn't, but
Hmm.
that's an important thing you touch upon because everybody wants to be thought of, well, and social media, television shows, billboards which show all lawyers as these wealthy assholes that live in mansions and drive Mercedes. I often say to the class, most lawyers I know are working people. They're not wealthy people. Most lawyers in this country, half of them, are solo practitioners. They work by themselves. They do small court matters. They're not wealthy. It's like being a teacher or being a psychologist or being an architect or a CPA. They're not wealthy people. So, and most of them, a lot of them are just trying to do their best. So I think many lawyers feel hurt by that and somewhat resentful because they feel like you step in my shoes for a
Right.
minute.
Hmm.
You see how easy it is.
That's
And
right.
I'm trying to do my best here and I'm trying to give you the best advice I can. And it doesn't feel very good when, people have that view of you.
And I think that does wear on people. Like you're like,
Absolutely.
just stop. Like you don't get it.
Hmm.
You could say, you have these other stressors, Kathy, that we talked about in the profession. But okay, and then you add on to the pile-on the cultural perception of lawyers, and then lawyers might be left asking, why am I even doing this? Why am I even
Hmm.
being a lawyer? And when I lecture at law firms or other law firms or law schools, I say to myself, lawyers have the biggest, most imaginative fantasy lives of any profession I know. And how many lawyers have I known who dream about leaving the law and being a pastry chef or owning a bookstore or a travel agency or a bartender, anything but being a lawyer because they find themselves in this position uh, with all these problems, but also the public perception of it. At least contrasted with a doctor, at least for, the most part, they believe they're trying to help and heal people. Lawyers are trying to help people too.
That's right.
Some of the best parts of my life as a lawyer have been really substantially helping people.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I know that one of your missions, Dan, is to talk about the stigma of mental health, which I think is a really noble pursuit. But even just hearing you and Kathy dialogue about the stigma of lawyers and how maybe there needs to be more awareness of that. And even connecting that with kind of some of those pessimistic qualities, here you are being stigmatized, you're working hard. Um, coupled with some of those other pieces you mentioned of pragmatically, a lawyer has to look at the cracks in the vase, and how that lends itself to pessimism. Can you talk a little bit as an instructor, as a professor, when you're honing in on the quality of cynicism and pessimism and stigma of the field? How do you maybe bring awareness to your students or help them kind of engage in some of those elements?
Well, another thing I do with them is my class is 3 hours long. So I tell them right from the get-go, no laptops, no computers, no cell phones. We're gonna have a 15-minute break in the middle. You could check your cell phone. Okay, notes, what are you gonna do? I tell them my class is the most popular class because most law books cost about 200 bucks. I have them purchase a eighth grade composition book from Walgreens that cost about $2. And what are we going to do with these? Well, you're going to bring them and a pen, and you're going to take notes if you want. The other thing you're going to do, we're going to have you keep track of your daily cell phone use. The other thing we're going to do is start learning about this practice of gratitude and what that looks like. They have a lot of problems with that initially because they think I don't have anything to be grateful for, or, I mean, so I'm grateful for my family or I'm grateful for my health. And I say, all the science on it shows that ain't going to do it. It's not going to have an effect on your mood. You have to widen your scope of with mindfulness, and you begin to recognize, gee, there's a lot of things throughout my day that I can appreciate. And they know that that has a big effect on mood. And so I have them do that. And I talk a lot about that. And as a way, and I say, we need a counterweight to these things like perfectionism, pessimism. That's one way to go about it. Just one way.
Yeah, I love that. I think gratitude, when we break it down into the daily experiences that we have that we overlook and we're not honing in on, and then we reorient our lens and start to
Yes.
really be grateful for those things. It really does shape our attitude, and I think that's great that you're really instilling that, as well as reinforcing the technology mantra
Yeah.
within your classroom.
And I say with the technology thing, it's just a fire hose of information. So I say the
Hmm.
first class, I call it my opening statement to them, like I would in trial. I say, listen, if you need me up to in this class to stand up here and give you 20 tips or whatever, you don't need me. You can go on and Google that. We could bring your cell phones back in. But I think as I get older, I think what people are hungering for, including my students, is a perspective. What does this mean? I mean, what
Mm,
does this information mean to me? What does how do we sort through it and think what's most important or not important? I think so many young people are lost, in this a flood of information. And their last assignment for the semester is to write me a 10-page paper on what they learned. And it's for my eyes only, and they could say anything they want. And many of these would light your hair on fire if you read them. Serious stories of all kinds of things. They spend a lot of time on it. One student gave me a 30-page paper. So they're trying to grapple with these issues of what does this really mean to me? Maybe no one's ever even asked them. I mean, dysfunctional families like mine, no one really particularly ever asked me what I wanted, or, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of lawyers come from dysfunctional families.
Mm.
What
I
made
love
you
that
become,
you're Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
what made you become an attorney? What made you decide to go to law school?
Yeah, well, when I was 16, I met this this lawyer. He was the boyfriend of my sister's best friend. I thought, well, he looks like a great guy, and he seems to, kind of got it figured out. And so I actually, my undergrad degree was in psychology, and I was going to get my PhD. And then I chickened out and said, I can't spend 4 more years in college. I just can't do it. So I took a year off, and then I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do with a psychology degree. So I applied to one law school. I got in, and then after 1 year, I hated it, and I was trying to tell my mother about it. And she said, we were at a restaurant with my other brother, and I said, Mom, I'm unhappy. I just don't want to do this anymore. And she was listening, and then she goes, I wonder when our food's going to get here. Or looks like they've changed the wallpaper in the restaurant. My mother didn't want to hear it.
Mhm.
And I think the family of five kids, for whatever reason, in my dysfunctional family, I was the family hero. And I think my mom put all her hopes in me. And I, in some way, became for her the man she thought she married.
Mm.
And my dad, when he was a young man, was full of promise, captain of his football team. He went to college. He had all these accomplishments at a very young age. But then he started drinking and fell apart, and the whole trajectory of his life changed dramatically. So I think for my mother, that happened, and then I went back to law school. And I
Mm.
bet you there's many people out there, law students or lawyers, who have had that talk with their wives or their husbands, their parents, and those people discourage them from that
Mhm.
kind, even feeling that way, you know?
Wow. I really appreciate you opening up and sharing about your family. You mentioned earlier, you used the word dysfunctional families, and you were wondering if maybe there's a correlation with people in the law profession and dysfunctional families. You also, in sharing a little bit about your family experience, you mentioned that you were the hero. And, at first glance, that seems like a positive role to be in, but there's a lot of pressure there. And I wonder if you can talk about when you first noticed that you were stepping into that role, or you were being placed in that role of the
Yeah.
the hero.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I was in high school, and I really became good at sports and good at school. And my brother, my younger brother, who's the subject of the film, My Brother Lost in Time, A Bipolar Life, my younger brother who died 2 years ago, he was 3 years younger, and he became the black sheep of the
Mm.
family, and rebelled and started taking drugs and was the bad kid. Wouldn't go to school, didn't play sports. So there are these dramatic opposites. And I also got rewarded for being the nice kid. I was super polite. I was nice. I never wanted any conflict. I really was like that. And I think that it played out for me, clearly as being a lawyer, and not only a lawyer, but a successful lawyer. So in my legal community, we have 4,000 lawyers, and not too long ago, I was voted one of the top 10 most respected lawyers in my community.
Mm.
So not just successful, but I think that was the most meaningful word to me, because it was like my peers uh, it had to do like in my way of looking at it, like integrity. Like
Mhm.
I think that meant a lot to me. So I think that all in all, I could think of, my life, reflecting on it. I have a lot to be grateful for. Um, and what crushed me is when my brother died 2 years ago, and I could have gone down that path very, very, very easily. And my brother, he was successful in his own right, even with bipolar disorder. Uh, but most of his life, he thought of us in competition with one another, especially for my mother's affection. And he resented me a lot, even though we loved each other a lot. Uh, and we got in one argument where he said, your mom's favorite, you're the hero. And I go, yeah, it's not so great. I mean, it feels terrible a lot, And when I was diagnosed with depression and I couldn't practice law, I was on a disability policy for a year. Here I was supposed to be this hero type, the successful type, never complain, and my life was falling apart. So I felt like a failure, and he was given more license to fall apart, I think. Um, but to the day he died, it was never reconciled between us. I think we knew we loved one another very much, but I think the mental health, the family dynamics got in the way of that quite a bit.
Wow, that's really um, impactful. Just hearing about those family dynamics, and you raise a really good point about. I don't think people always appreciate this, that the family hero or maybe the favorite child um, didn't necessarily choose that role, and so when they can face a lot of resentment for something that wasn't their decision, and there can be a lot of pain there on for all parties, and so it almost feels like a lose-lose situation, in terms of the sibling experience, the person experience who's maybe the favored child, and just it can contribute towards a rift. And I appreciate you kind of giving voice to some of those sibling dynamics. I watched the documentary. I was incredibly touched by it. Um, and you talked a little bit at the beginning of the documentary about how you and your brother were very close, and you played basketball, and you bathed together, and you just had that. You were so close in age, and um, shared such kind of a similar experience early on, and then drifted apart. Um, I also was really, think the title of your documentary is really poignant. And I'm really captured by kind of the lost in time. And so I wonder if maybe you can speak a little bit about the title of the documentary, as well as maybe your journey into making it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that a lot of it is relates to when he died. Uh, it was very traumatic to me. It was not as traumatic to my three older siblings because they were older. They weren't, they didn't grow up together like my younger brother and I. They weren't as close. And my brother had burned his bridges with them, largely because of his bipolar disorder. So when my brother died, even though he lived in the same city, uh, we didn't see each other the last 3, 4, 5 years, largely because he did not want to. Uh, he kind of vilified me. He always thought I was trying to put him in a mental institution. He'd get upset when I thought he was crazy. He said, "No, you're crazy," and we did that in the film. Um, so when he died, to be honest, I went searching back in time to try to capture his who he really was and his essence. And he was lost in time in the sense that I was really searching, over the course of our lifetimes to come to some kind of, I think, kind of like a full picture of who he was and who we were together and what we meant to each other. And I didn't want the last statement of it to be, oh, he's just a mentally ill person who died of a drug problem. He was a lot more than that, and a lot of goodness in him and a lot of love between us. And I was trying to find that, and sometimes it took me back into more recent times, but in the film, go way back in time, when we were little children playing together. And so I think that's true as human beings. We're sifting through our memories, especially as we get older, we reflect on our lives and our times with different people. People were here, people weren't here. And so that's what that meant to me.
Mm. That's really touching. And I do remember that moment in the film that you talked about when you recalled that your brother said that he was not didn't struggle with mental illness, and that you did. And one of the takeaways that I had when I saw that was where stigma comes from. We oftentimes think that stigma is comes external to us and that we're stigmatized, but sometimes we ourselves are the ones that are perpetuating the stigma, through denial, through escapism, through self-medication, through a variety of means.
Absolutely. I think that's very, very true because I know, speaking for myself, I had lots of love and support around me. Not, in the beginning, it was hard for people to understand how I could have depression when I was this attorney and everything was going great. But over time, what I would notice is not other people isolating me, but me isolating myself. And I had just really felt worthless, low self-esteem. Life felt kind of meaningless. That trap of depression, that rabbit hole that you go down. And yeah, those were really tough times. I think that, we talked earlier about the gifts of depression. And I think to myself, well, if I hadn't had depression, I wouldn't have gone on to do all these things that have been meaningful to me, and I wouldn't have chosen, consciously chosen to have depression, far, far, far from it. But somehow the universe conspired this was my thing that I had to deal. It might be other people, it's other disabilities or illnesses or challenges. So I like to think that good has come out of it, and that not only for other people, but for me, the amazing people I've met, people from all walks of life. I find it often a mystery, to be honest with you. I guest lectured at Harvard Law School, at Yale Law School, and at both places. I said, I don't even know how I got here. Here I am, this guy, this bald guy, from Buffalo in my $200 suit, and I'm standing here at Harvard. You know, uh, I think my way of thinking about it is that somehow, some way, the this all unfolded, and it was just part of my path in life. And with the showing up, the creating of the documentary, there are many moments in that I clearly did not orchestrate or make happen. There were many other people who dropped in to the film. You could say chance coincidences, or I sometimes there's a guy who from his name is Patrick Lee. He's a extremely wealthy guy who lives in Buffalo. He owned a global company, sold it for a couple $100 billion, started a foundation 10 years ago. His son had bipolar like my brother and died like my brother. He, before we even released the film, he had somehow seen it and decided to bring all these other people on board in a way that never would have happened. You know, when I first thought of making the film, it was a year ago. I was sitting in Starbucks, and this guy I know, a local photographer, said, "Hey, Dan, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to write this article. I might submit it to the Buffalo paper about my brother and I. It was a 1 year anniversary, and or I've tried researching how to make a movie on your cell phone camera." And he said, "Really?" He goes, "Why don't you talk to my son? He's moving back to Buffalo from New Mexico. He's an independent filmmaker, has done stuff with Ken Burns and PBS and film festivals." I said, "Well, why would I want to meet him?" You know, and I said, he said, "Well, talk to him about making a film." I go, I didn't put a lot of stock in it, but he came back. I met with him. He listened to my story, and I said, "Listen, man, it's great. We shared a coffee, but I don't have the kind of money it would take to pay a professional filmmaker to make a film." And I researched it, and it's like $1,000 to $2,000 per minute. So a 15-minute film would be like $30,000. But I said, "Thanks for listening to me." And I mean, he listened and he said, "Dan, I'm a storyteller and I want to tell this story." And later it would come to pass, I didn't know then, he has depression.
Wow.
So, what are the chances of meeting such a talented young man who I think I ended up coming up with 2 grand to pay him? And and then him being so sensitive to the topic because he had depression. I mean, the chances of that, I think, like a needle in a haystack, and then these other people getting involved in PBS, is far beyond my little sphere of influence. And I just think that, I think the story is a pretty universal one, you know, the love
Mhm.
between two brothers. And then this overlay of loss and mental illness that affects so many people.
Where can our listeners see the documentary? If you want to speak
Sure.
a little bit.
Yes. Yes. It's if you go to YouTube and it's type in PBS for it stands for Public Broadcasting System, and the title of the film is My Brother Lost in Time: A Bipolar Life. It'll come up, and it's 15 minutes long, and it's kind of traveling around the U.S. now in different contexts. NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, New York State is going to be screening it at their annual convention in Albany in November, and I'm going to be talking about the film. So it's I don't know if gratifying is the right word. It's meaningful to me that people resonate with it, and when I first showed it we partnered with a not-for-profit organization for the funding of the film. And the director was the first person, the director of the crisis services was the first person to see the film. And she said, "Dan, it's a very tender portrait of you and your brother." And, when I think about the film, that's the best thing anybody could ever say to me because I didn't think of that, but that's what I wanted to come through. If I could think of a word, it would be tender, you
Hmm.
know, tender, like a loving and gentle storytelling of our lives together.
I think that's a really great word. When I watched it, I felt that tenderness. It felt like it was really a great vehicle for showing your love and tenderness to your brother, seeing the reflection of the tenderness that you had together, really upholding and celebrating his legacy, and also being a kind of stepping stone for other people to connect with, as you mentioned, as they watch the documentary and really connect with some of those universal themes of
Yes.
mental illness, loss, addiction. And, I'm reminded of the words that you used when we opened up today and talked about the blessing and the pain and how they coexist together. And I think that really, I feel that combination as I'm listening to you talk, in terms of being able to share something so beautiful, and so touching to people, but yet it coming from a place that's very painful.
I said to the law students who saw the film, I said, just because something's difficult, doesn't mean it's not meaningful. Most things that are meaningful in life are painful and difficult.
Hmm.
And it was no bed of roses making this film. It was very difficult making this film. And the filmmakers in the midway said, "This is going great. It's going to help a lot of people." I remember feeling depressed, somewhat traumatized, and saying, I feel like it's walking into a wind tunnel against the wind,
Mm.
and then the film premiered at the University of Buffalo Center for the Arts, and we had like 500 people. There weren't any seats left. And I remember walking into the, the theater and being overwhelmed. And I had both hands in my pockets. People didn't know that. But in one hand, I had a rosary, which was my Polish grandma gave it to me before she died. So it's over 100 years old. And I was holding on to it. And I just said, God, I can't go through with this. I can't do this. And really in the other pocket, I imagined my brother's hand,
Mm.
holding my hand, really.
Mm.
And I had this really powerful dream the night before the premiere, and it was like I don't know if you call it a lucid dream, but I was awake, but I was dreaming, I guess. And he was laying next to me, in between my wife and I, as he was as a small child.
Mm.
And he was maybe 5 or 6, and he rolled over towards me to cuddle with me. And then I woke up and I felt like he was with me somehow, and so yeah, those were powerful experiences, and kind of like in me, like saying, the universe saying, yeah, you keep going.
Wow, that is very powerful. I appreciate you sharing that. The vivid description of being in a wind tunnel going against the wind. I also am really touched by hearing your dream. And one thing that comes to me is maybe in your brother's life, um, he was a little resentful that you were in kind of that hero role by positioned by your mom. But it sounds like as he was a young child and he was cuddling with you, it felt like he was embracing that and he was leaning into the fact that you were the protector. And
Well, yes, and I say in the film, I when he died, it was not only losing my brother, it was losing my son, because
mhm,
I became in that unconsciously that family dynamic, the good father. My dad was the bad
mhm,
father. And I think that I read this once by Carl Jung, Freud's protege, who said, the worst thing that we can do to our children is to put on them our unlived lives. And I think that's exactly what happened with my parents, tragically. Um, the life that they thought they would live when they were younger, the dreams they thought they would have when they were younger, they put those unconsciously on us. And I for like, theoretically succeeded, and my
Mm-hmm.
brother failed. And I think um, when you combine genetics with drug addiction and those things, it's just the perfect storm for what happened to my brother.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah. Go ahead, Kathy. Sorry.
I'm just thinking as we close out today, how what you're really talking about is the nonlinear path of recovery and how
Yes,
that's the nature of recovery.
I
With
think that's very true. I think that's extremely important. I was meeting with a guy this morning with depression. His son, who was actually my law student, contacted me and said, "My dad has depression. Would you meet him for coffee?" So we did. And he expressed, "I just don't see why I'm not getting better." And I said, one of the worst aspects of depression is it's nonlinear. I didn't use those words, but I said, we make progress and then we don't make progress. And then we have 2 good days and then one awful day. And I said, it's the nature of the illness. And he said, does it get better? And I said, well, yes, speaking for myself. And he said, how so? And I go, well, with therapy and medication, the two best things you could have, you got to have both, is that in the past, maybe my depression would last months. On a pain scale, it'd be a 8, 9, or 10. Now it may last 3 or 4 days. And on a pain scale, might be at its worst a 5. So, thinking realistically and practically, maybe that's something to aspire to. And I didn't tell him that, uh, I said, this is my own experience. But if you're looking for some hope, I could tell you that I know how hard it is not to feel hope or not feel progress. But over time, just keep, like, hey, keep working your program.
Mm-hmm. That's very inspirational. And one of the things you mentioned before we hit the record button is you talked about how there are panels, there are groups of people who are watching the documentary and panels that are congregating and having discussions afterwards. And Kathy and I will link the video in underneath our YouTube page and encourage our listeners to do the same because there's so many rich opportunity to watch the documentary and really discuss uh, issues that we've talked about today, including family dynamics, including sibling or parent-child expectations, family role.
Yes, exactly. And I imagine them, I call them town hall meetings on depression. And I said to
Mm-hmm.
somebody recently, we have town hall meetings, all kinds of stupid stuff, raising our water taxes or, a variance in the building code, or yet, one of the biggest issues facing our country and our globe is mental illness. And there's not enough of that.
Mm-hmm.
There just isn't. And so I think hopefully in a teeny way, the film encourages people to take that step to have their own community town hall on
Mm-hmm.
depression and then have their own panel.
I like that. I like that word town hall too. And so this is going to be a call to our listeners to kind of utilize the documentary for your own personal use, as well as to take part in panels and town halls to really process as a community the implications of your experiences and your message.
Absolutely. And there's plenty of time to do it because next September is National Suicide Awareness Month and next October is National Depression Awareness Month. So I'd encourage everybody to plant something in their community.
That's right. I think that's a wonderful idea. And Dan, we cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule to really talk about something you're so passionate about and that you're really making, you're an agent of change in terms of moving mountains in your community. And do you have any kind of closing thoughts for our listeners as they're reflecting on some of your words and your experiences and your kind of the issues that you've navigated in life?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think of it how I close out the film to never give up hope, to never stop hoping, and to to keep loving people with mental illness. And that is a challenge because, like my brother and I, sometimes it's very difficult to deal with him. But keep hoping and keep loving people and keep trying to. My brother, you could say, lived much longer than he could have. So I think that's the message, is that even though it's a film about love and loss, it's also a film about hope and love.
I can't think of two better words to end a final note on other than hope and love.
I agree.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you,
Well,
Dan.
thanks for all the good you do in the world, Kathy and Cynthia. I appreciate you reaching out to me.